Hello, everyone. I'm Evan Shapiro. I am your host for Streaming Media Connect. Welcome back to the second day of Streaming Media Connect and to a great panel called Scale Matters, How to Deliver High Quality, High Stakes Streams, sponsored by our friends at BeLive. I want to remind you that every session we give away an Amazon gift card of $50 to the first person who can name the tune and the band that was just playing in the chat. So rule number one, you have to be the first person to name both the tune and the band. And then secondarily, you have to put it in the chat. And then last, you have to be here at the end of the session to win. Now, everyone's going to stick around for the whole session because it's going to be scintillating, but you have to be present to win. So even if you're not the first, keep putting your answers in the chat because you might be the person left here at the end, although everyone stays around for the whole panel. It's mandatory. A reminder to put the chat in the chat and keep your questions to the Q&A. That's what the Q part is. We like to have the chat and the answers to the songs in the chat, and our Steve will put information there, like where to find all these videos on YouTube next week. All the videos of every panel at Streaming Media Connect will be up on the YouTube channel. That'll be in the chat. Answers to the song and band are in the chat, but the questions go in the Q&A for the last segment of the panel, where the host will ask your questions, the Q, and get answers from our panelists, the A, for all of you. Thanks again to BeLive for sponsoring this session. And now let me throw it to our great moderator, Jason Thibeault. JT, welcome to the stage.
Thanks, Evan. Fantastic. Great to be here, everybody, this morning. Looking forward to this. Is going to be a really good panel and discussion on this topic, which is obviously something that is always top of mind for streamers and content rights holders and network operators, and especially viewers out there, is really how to deliver these great live events at scale. So we have a fantastic panel with us today. I'm Jason Thibeault, as Evan said. I'm the executive director of the Streaming Video Technology Alliance. We're an organization that helps companies build better scalable streaming video, so high quality video at scale. We're an industry body, so obviously we're not representative of any one single way. We bring people together to form consensus and create docs that the industry can use. This is one of those topics that we work a lot on, so I'm really excited to moderate this panel. All right, so here's how things are going to go. We're going to get the panelists on. We're going to make some introductions with them, and then we'll jump into questions. About the last 10 minutes or so, we'll open it up for audience Q&A. So get your questions ready. As Evan said, this panel is brought to you by the letters Q and A. So just put those in the Q&A box, and we will get to them at the end. All right, with that said, let's kick this off. So let's start off with Corey. Why don't you join us and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, Corey Behnke, LiveX. We are a live streaming services company based in New York City.
Fantastic. John.
Hi, everybody. I'm John Petrocelli. I'm the founder of Bulldog DM. We are the world's most experienced live stream studio, providing turnkey services to predominantly a brand-based client list.
Fantastic. And last but definitely not least, we've got Jay.
Hey, I'm Jay Kopelman, BeLive. We're a global live streaming service provider, really focusing on bringing events of large scale and small scale to all their viewers, focusing on web, OTT, and social delivery.
Awesome. That is fantastic. All right, well, let's jump into the question. So I think, where to start with this conversation about live streaming and scale and, great experiences and events is to really talk about sort of the key factors that contribute to success of these, of a successful end-to-end workflow, because it really is glass to glass, right? You've got content acquisition all the way through playback. Maybe Corey, maybe you can start us off, answering that question, sort of, what are some of the key factors that contribute to success?
So a lot of my frame of reference is New Year's Eve in Times Square. So we've produced the official webcast for New Year's Eve in Times Square the last 2009 plus wherever we are right now. So 14 years. And of course, mine are two things, right? And a lot of mine comes through the frame of production, although a lot of times we do have to spin up, the actual end-to-end playback side and the streaming side. But, my thing is pre-production. I know this is going to sound so boring, but it's like pre-production, visualizing failure and testing your end-to-end. And, you know, in the visualizing failure piece is really the redundancy piece, right? Like, you know, what is my second internet? What is my failover? What is my, you know, where I get the term visualizing failures from this astronaut for NASA, which is what NASA does, right? They go, oh, what is going to break? What can I visualize that's going to happen, so that when it does happen, I don't freak out, and I know what I'm going to do. My biggest thing, you know, there's this really funny quote, the fact that communication didn't happen, like we think communication happens, but it doesn't actually happen. Like you have to actually test your failover. I can't tell you how many times I've actually had the backup going, but the engineer didn't actually test the backup and actually do the failover. So that's the big thing. You know, the bigger the show, I think what's funny for me is the bigger the show, the more you tend to be a little bit more apprehensive about what can go wrong. It's those middle shows and those shows where you take for granted the things that you think you know that are really screw you, right? New Year's Eve, we have a really exhaustive, like, okay, 3 days before we're doing this, 2 days before we're doing this, 1 day before we're doing this. It's those middle shows, right? Those ones where you're like, oh, we got this. And then the other thing I like to say for those of you that are really have the big distribution side is make sure your cache is on after you turn it off. I've had that happen a couple times where, you know, oh, hey, the company needs to change their brand real quick. Okay, let me turn the cache off real quick. And then I don't turn it back on. So, you know, that's another big thing for those of you that actually handle the platforms that can be a big deal killer.
Fantastic. Jay, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I was basically saying the same thing about testing, having backups and secondary backups, and actually working through it. It's totally right. And we handle in most cases the full end to end, from, you say glass to glass, I say from like camera lens to computer screen. So it's like we're on site, we got the satellite uplink, the 4G backup, the on-site encoders, all going into a NOC and then going into our platform, and then having that distributed out to socials and our like embed code system, and just knowing that, as Corey said, stepping through those backups and really knowing that it's going to be there. And also to scale, of course, you know, if you have all of a sudden 1 million people watching a thing, which is what typically happens on these big events, knowing and having confidence that your infrastructure, your servers, your load balancers, all that stuff, you know, is there and will scale, and even, you know, over provision things, you know, as you need when you start something, and things tend to level out and go smoothly.
Great. And John, I know that you come from a unique perspective as well in this. So what are your thoughts on some of these factors?
You know, I think Corey said it best. We recommend, you know, one thing: test in any way, shape, or form that you can. And typically, when we work with brands, they're also partnered with, you know, sometimes multi-platinum music artists. So if there's a way to also rehearse and understand how that artist likes to perform, and also anticipate that they could completely change. They might come on later, it might start earlier. You know, you got to be prepared for those things. And if there's a way to contemplate how that's going to work, you might work with somebody who likes to. We just did a show with Michael Franti. I think he spends a quarter of the show out in the audience, you know, moving around. So understanding how that's going to play out in the overall experience, but you want to be able to plan for anything and everything that could possibly happen, and have systems in place that are, you know, redundant, right? Eliminate any single points of failure in the workflow, because to Jay's point, there could be hundreds of thousands of people tuning into this experience, and you want to be able to scale, you know.
And just to piggyback on what, sorry, just to piggyback on what John said, never forget to QC and monitor it as your end user. Because so many people, engineers, people are staring at, you know, either scopes or meters or really nice OLEDs, perfectly calibrated. But at the end of the day, someone's watching it on their phone, in a crowded space, on a laptop screen, on a Mac, and like the colors look like they do to the end user. And some artists are very particular on the sound and color, and that leads to achieving not just viewer, you know, satisfaction, but also your client. Because and not to, like, you know, overpromise, but also like properly deliver on what they expect the users are going to see and experience.
I remember that one story about the Game of Thrones episode. It was obviously not a live event, but it was the one where it was the super dark scene and the well, it is, yeah. Technically it's live. The director came out and basically told everybody, yeah, your TVs are not calibrated correctly. Stop complaining about stop complaining about it to me.
Yep.
It was funny. But Jay, actually, that covering what you guys just all talked about and really what John hit on leads me right into the next question, which is about sort of workflows and procedures. What do you set up? What do you put in place to make sure that live streaming event that you're delivering is uninterrupted, that you make sure that it.
Well,
Sorry.
I think, yeah, as it gets interrupted, it's almost like he's, yeah, I mean, Corey really laid it out, and it's a lot of rehearsing. And the specific workflows are multiple transmission paths, multiple delivery methods, and as what John said, we do a lot of sound checking, a lot of QCing, and it's just like test as much as you can. And when and have a plan, even if you have a primary and you have a backup. The easy thing about live streaming is if it all goes well, you just sit there and watch the show happen, unless you're directing and camera and shooting and all those things. But being able to think on your feet and see the whole setup and have at least one or two people who really see the whole pipeline of what's happening, so that if something happens that's atypical or you couldn't help it, there's a plan in place. Like I remember one fashion week, this is a very long time ago, we were using like Uyala and it just went down. They crashed. This was, I don't know, 2012 maybe, who knows. And on our system, we have a control of what we show the front end user. So we were showing them a Uyala stream, and then we were like, all right, well that's crashing. Let's throw the YouTube embed in there, just like a quick fix so that people can still watch the stream. It's the user maybe is jarring, but they've still experienced the show. That was a fashion show, I imagine, and clients as happy as they can be.
So John or Corey, I mean, I know we talked a lot about so far, even just this early part of the panel, about testing and, making sure that you have redundancy and backup and testing the redundancy and backup. But are there any other, procedures or anything, war rooms or things like that you guys recommend needs to be set up in order to ensure uninterrupted live streaming?
I mean, I like to pick up where Jay left off. For New Year's, really having that one, he talked about someone who understands the entire thing, right? So that person a lot of times is me, where I'm not for New Year's. I'm really thinking about the next hour, the next half hour, the next 15 minutes, and the team is really producing the show on the minute by minute basis. I always tell people, it's really a way of thinking as a live stream producer, over the last 20 years of like, I always tell people, and this isn't necessarily for a failover system, but it kind of informs the way that I think as a producer. When you're about 30 minutes before you go live, you should call your vendor that's going to come pick up your lights to make sure the truck driver's in the thing so that you can have strike. No, but so it's like you should be ahead, right? And really live streaming is assembly line editing, right? We're putting things on an assembly line and they're getting out on air. And so it's really important to support the team and get things ready for them, and then anticipate. That whole thing of visualizing failure is really an anticipation of not just what can go wrong, but what you can do to, change or anticipate what's going to happen. On the failover side, primary and backup routers are really important. Even cellular failover for internet, that's the number one thing. That's really critical. And then, always pulling the plug on that primary on rehearsal day to make sure that it's going to do what you think it's going to do, so it doesn't do that. And to Jay's point, it's so funny. We kind of do the same thing where we'll have like a Vimeo embed or something, just like he said, the YouTube embed, just something where, so a lot of people just anticipate that the platform is going to save them, right? They're like, oh, well, I'm going out on Twitter, I'm going out on Facebook, I'm going out on YouTube, and I'm going out on the private platform. Well, the private platform is an enterprise, so I'm good to go. And, having those kind of front end, having an embed system and a front end so that you can quickly switch that out has saved us multiple times on major shows.
Anything to add, John, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think, I come out of AEG, who operates a lot of venues and tours and arenas, I think music festivals. I think we need to be realistic and understand a lot of times when we're executing these experiences, the priority for these shows is the room, right? The people who are physically attending. And a way to get ahead of that is to do some form of a site survey, take a look at the tech specs, what's the situation with connectivity at the venue where the experience is happening. And I found that solves a lot of potential headache. We go into a room and it's shared Wi-Fi, so that means everybody in the room is using it in some capacity. We know ahead of time we've got to bring some sort of supplemental bandwidth to make this experience come to life and to properly scale. So really kind of proactive planning and understanding, the capabilities in the facilities that are there and that are available. Can we run cable? Can we do things like seat kills? That's going to affect the efficacy and the quality of the overall experience. So getting ahead of that, and typically, coming out of the pandemic, most venues have some sort of a tech manager or tech specs available, again, to give you an idea of what you need to do to supplement, to create that amplified live show. I mean, ironically, the tune in from the online audience is going to be, sometimes 20 to up to 50 times what the ticketed or the in-person audience is. But the reality is they don't think that way. They want to service their people that are there in the room, that have paid to come in, and that's fully understandable. So it's on us to take that proactive measure and figure out how am I going to make this experience come to life and not interrupt what's happening in the room.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And actually, kind of everything that you guys have just talked about sort of lends itself to the next question, which is when we're thinking about live streams and the live stream experience, and then all that's going into it, all the planning, the pre-planning, the testing, plan, all of that obviously has to expose sort of what we'll just call KPIs, right? So every person, everybody involved in delivering a live stream has to have some sense of what makes this successful. What are the things that we need to measure and look at? And that's really sort of the next question is, what defines the live stream experience? Is it just that it's up? Is it just that people can authenticate to it and watch it? Is it just that people can pay for it? What are some of the KPIs that brands should consider and work with? And John, maybe we can start with you, since you do work with a lot of brands. What are some of their pain points that they want to measure?
I started this business probably too early in terms of engaging with the community, but that afforded my team and I to actually listen to them, and they kept coming back to us and saying, "Hey, we've got these pain points, right? Cord cutting, ad blocking, brand safety, and we're completely concerned about how we're going to engage and connect to a younger millennial and now really a Gen Z consumer, and that's a pretty massive issue for them." And the thing that's kind of come out of our work and what we're seeing and talking to them is their biggest success and win almost in every experience is watch time, right? They're presupposing that there's going to be some level of tune-in. That's more on their media teams and how they market the experience. But if they can come out, and we've seen this with watch time of chunks of minutes, that is a massive home run and a massive success for them. They're typically finding that it's a challenge to get someone's attention in today's economy and today's marketing for more than 4, 6, 8 seconds. And here, if they can get 6, 8, 12, 20, we've done experiences where the average watch time was half an hour or even exceeding an hour, depending upon the content. That's a pretty significant win for them. And then if you can deliver some reporting that talks about how the audience behaved, what devices they were on, where they were tuning in from, what operating systems the majority of them are on, that helps them then formulate a game plan to go forward. And then the big win is typically we see, gee, I spent a fraction of what I typically spend in buying traditional commercials on television or traditional forms of marketing, but I got a pretty stunning result. I mean, I reached my target audience for an average of 17 minutes. And the brands typically out there, these are the best marketers in the world, right? It's Coca-Cola, Samsung, Procter & Gamble. And the win there is we're going to give you, 14 minutes of watch time. What do you want to do with that time? Is it introduce a new product, product launch, customer acquisition, customer retention, collect an email? Do you want to actually sell something in that experience? And these marketers then, when they see that new opportunity that's resulted in that success, the result is they're going to do more of this. They're going to get into some sort of a cadence and actually do a calendar of live experiences. That's the real predominant thing we've seen coming out of our work, and certainly, what the brands are giving us in terms of feedback.
Corey,
And
what about you?
I think-
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
No, oh, sure. Sure. I was going to say, just piggyback off John about building a cadence of live streaming and events. And we see that a lot on, people who are very successful on Twitch, on YouTube, very dedicated audience with a cadence. And we started working with Walmart about a year and a half ago, developing their live e-commerce platform and, higher end video production side of it. And that's what they found. And we've been doing we do a big kind of tentpole, maybe every 2 to 3 months, usually around like back to school and holiday and those type of things. And for them, it's a lot about brand awareness, actually selling some merchandise and providing a connected experience to their users. So for that, we're doing live shopping on owned and operated Walmart.com/live. We're doing live shopping on Twitter. I think in the past we've done IG, Facebook, TikTok, all concurrently, shopping across all syndicated. That social stuff has kind of died down a little. But just and having get them back the results of hear what the users are, their sentiment, what they're shopping, the conversation and just keeping your audience in tune to entertain and sell essentially in that kind of environment.
No, that's interesting. So the KPIs then you would pull that your customers pull there would really be about sort of what the viewers or what the users are doing in response to the things that are available through the content. So what are they clicking on? What are they looking at product wise?
Yeah, sure. So there's a whole pop out options panel for all the products. So it's are they browsing? Are they zooming? Are they adding to cart? And all those types of micro engagements, if you will.
Oh, okay. Corey, what are your thoughts? What KPIs are you seeing that are really important to your customers?
I think the number one thing is, a lot of I would say the bigger streams, they're really looking for kind of what Jay's talking about, where it's the shopping, the e-commerce, what is the new thing that we did and how successful was it, right?
Yes.
Because they're usually used to doing the bigger shows, so they kind of, watch time is great. I mean, John saying he's getting watch time, in my opinion, anything over 22 minutes is freaking awesome for a live stream. If you can keep people engaged that long. I was really proud on New Year's. We've only had maybe 4 or 5 New Year's, more so the last ones where we increased the pace of the show and we saw that people were staying on longer. So were things that we were doing actually in the content to increase the viewing time to be longer. I think that's the number one thing for most brands is how long can I keep people here, as opposed to, I think that a lot of brands have gotten smart to the fact that it's not about the big number. It's not about concurrence necessarily. Concurrence is awesome, but it's the niche target of your audience and what are they doing when they come and experience this moment. And to me, I think that's the most important thing. And I think that's what we really encourage brands to look at, because, I used to work at livestream.com, and I can't tell you how many times somebody would call and be like, yeah, I'm going to get 1 million stream. I'm going to get 1 million viewers on this stream. And we've all literally done this. I've said this so many times. We've all had this. We're oh yeah. And it could be the biggest artist, right? But if you put them on a microsite in the middle of nowhere, in 4 pages deep in Verizon or AT&T's, website ecosystem or Sports Illustrated, it's not going to get the views. So I remember this. I did the Sports Illustrated swimsuit launch. Terrible job that I had being the encoding engineer for that for a week, and literally just had a live view backpack. It was the greatest job in the world. I just got to go everywhere and have a live view backpack. But it was just so funny where Sports Illustrated put the stream had everything to do with all the KPIs and everything. No matter what we did, it was if you put it on, at the time, Sports Illustrated's homepage, you got a lot more views than if you put it on the swimsuit page 4 pages deep. So, I think a lot of things are working on the training brands about things like that, right? So much of what we do is helping to, a lot of times the person that's working with us is the marketing person, so they're not necessarily, they're up on all of the games and all the social media stuff, but not as it pertains necessarily to live streaming. So a lot of things are things like that, where you're trying to train the brands on what are the important metrics. For me, viewing time's probably the number one metric, and then I would say concurrence after that.
And, I would add to Corey and Jay's points here is when we talk about best practices with our clients, first and foremost, is don't put up surveillance video. no matter if if you hired Drake or you've got some, massive talent, the audience might come and they might check that out, but they're not going to stick around, especially a younger viewer. And we encourage transforming that viewer into a participant, right? So if there's chat, nobody wants polarizing, troll-laden chat, moderate that. Make the conversation related to the video. We find when we do that, they stick around a lot longer. They tend to invite their friends, and they're going to come back to future broadcasts. And then give them something to do while they're there. Chat, polling, trivia, graphics, calls to action, that type of information, maybe change their camera perspective. Now they're actually a participant in the experience. And we see those tools put in place, the watch time expands literally exponentially.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Something that you guys are all touching on that it's not necessarily like distills or boils down to a KPI is engagement, right? It's viewer engagement, whether that equates to how long they watched, how much they watch, what they click on, what they do. And I think that's really important that, to point that out, because that, I think, is probably a complication in delivering a great experience, right? And so, Corey, I'm going to see if you can lead us off with answering this question, but, how do you incorporate interactive elements into these live streams, and what considerations are there for doing that at scale and making sure that the experience is good? Like, how do you promote interactivity? How do you promote this engagement?
Well, that's the hardest part, is, when you have 200,000 concurrents or even less on your chat, you're not being able to view any chats, right? You have to use APIs and use tools to get the chat into your engagement periods. I always think it's funny, like every year goes by, and I think the pandemic pushed us back a little bit on interactivity, but it's so funny, like the number one reason to live stream, right, to not just play back some video, is to engage your audience and have them interact with the viewer and the talent, right? And what's funny to me is how scared brands are to do this. And they're just, I mean, the bigger the brand, the more scared they are, right? And fear. I want to bring up, we had a Shorty Award winning 6-camera Twitch stream with Starfish and Madwell. It was for Verizon, was the main client. It's one of the coolest things we've ever done. We did it last year. We basically put this Twitch streamer, Average Jonas, we did a GoPro rig, and it was completely live. And there were like, we built a studio. Well, we didn't, but we had the cameras and did that piece. But it was cool because they had actors as non-player characters that this Twitch streamer could go and talk to. And it was just like, I literally was like, this is what I've been trying to do for 15 years of my life, right? We had 87,000 concurrents. But what was cool is, we built a tool to take the chat so that, he had a progress meter, and he had the different things that he could do. So he could choose what to do, and then the viewers could kind of choose for him. And this isn't the only, there's many, many things like this. But again, like what was crazy to me was that it was Verizon and Xbox. So, it was Microsoft, so they were a little bit more like, hey, let's, we're going to do this on this kid's channel. So, we're going to help facilitate this experience. But I think you have to build, we build some YouTube, we take the YouTube API and be able to take the chat out of that and put it into another module that then can do other things, that then can push graphics. I think you have to do a lot of, I think you have to do the engine work on whatever platform that you're going to use, because as you increase concurrent viewers, it is very hard to keep up, and you really need an engine to hold that information and be able to push that out graphically. And you see this, what's crazy is the Twitch streamers alone have been doing this with the OBS plugins and a lot of the streaming plugins, where they're taking this data from all the different platforms and pushing it out as graphics. And, it tends to look crazy, little coins and all the things that go on. And TikTok, we just did an MLB home run derby for on TikTok for during the home run derby, and we were trying to kind of replicate a little bit of like a little less of all the different jangly things going on, and trying to be a little more specific about that interactivity. But engagement and interactivity, I feel like it's all, we keep saying it's the future, and so many brands are just afraid to do it, honestly.
Jay, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely building that relationship over time with those brands, like help them understand that, like, hey, maybe you do know what you're talking about, and you can kind of show those successes, and then they'll be more willing to kind of go out on the limb and do some of those more crazy things. And yeah, I mean, definitely what Corey was saying. I mean, utilizing APIs and, you know, scaling technologies, to talk about the panel we're on, to handle that kind of load is definitely what you need to do. And those, yeah, a lot on-screen graphic elements, thermometer type stuff. That stuff's just really great to show people that you're still connecting. You know, there's a lot of like choose your view type of experiences where like you can show people multiple angles and have them pick what out of those things they can see. And back to your question about like, you know, in that workflow that we've done, that ends up being like a 4K quad feed that we stream and the end users ingest, but don't know they're really watching that type of quad. They're just choosing in like a region of interest around that interface. And so that and then lands itself to, not since we're doing the production, we can build that quad, we can do a 4K full transmission workflow and delivery workflow, and that's one way that the like end digital experience can, you know, affect all of the video production behind it.
John.
I think, you know, Corey's dead on. When brands are doing anything live, the level of anxiousness and anxiety is off the charts, and, you know, rightfully so. They're putting their brand and their name out there in real time to anybody. And I think the early days of this industry it was newsworthy because of the, you know, well-known failures, right? The Victoria's Secret crash, or Oprah Winfrey doing a broadcast that I think failed and didn't make it to the air, and that got a lot of news coverage. And I don't think people have forgotten those types of you know, things that the result that happens to you and your brand, right? They're not going to say, oh, someone didn't have a backup encoder. They're going to say Toyota stream failed. And I think in the pandemic, you saw all these companies went out and got all kinds of funding and try to do shows with music artists, and it was, I think, a failure every week or every other week. So, you know, I think this is not easy to do. Brands do have anxiety, but if you can make them comfortable and they get into this business and you do it the right way, the result is pretty, you know, pretty significant, and they're pretty happy, and they're going to get into this with some programming and some cadence around how they're going to properly market going forward. And, you know, we spend a lot of time talking to people about taking traditional media dollars and putting it into this medium because of the results, and it's again a fraction of what they're spending you know, traditionally, again, but the results more than speak for themselves.
So a lot of what we talked about is, you know, the sort of, we'll call it the back end stuff, right? It's how do you know, the three of you and your companies help brands build and deliver these experiences at scale. But there's also another component of your work with those brands, right? And it's really to sort of consult with them and help them and try to get them to, you know, try to help them improve sort of what those activations are and the users that engage with those. So John, maybe you can continue on here a little bit, and then we can open it up to Corey and Jay. You know, what can or what do streaming service providers need to do to sort of contemplate and helping brands amplify these experiences with live streaming, and sort of what are you advising brands to do better in order to get more people connected to and engaging with their content?
I think the key, or the most important growing part of this market, is amplification, right? Because the notion and the idea of experiential marketing is pretty powerful. Again, considering a younger consumer values a shared experience with their friends far more than they do, you know, buying a house or a watch or a car. And there's a, you know, the idea of you buying a high ticket item as a young person now is so much further. The goalposts have really moved. They're more focused on, you know, I'm going to connect in real time, especially around an event, whether that's you know, beauty, music, fashion, you know, sports, etc. And, you know, this is a great, also an opportunity for brands to execute around that, and taking what they're doing, and they've invested the money in the experience, in the idea of layering in a live stream and a camera production to amplify it out, is more than justifies the initial expense they've invested in the experience. You know, even up to scale at a music festival like a Coachella, you've got 125,000 people a day for all 3 days, even back-to-back weekends. It makes sense for a Verizon or a T-Mobile to then partner and take, you know, present that live stream out to that audience, you know, well into the millions. Having said that, that's again a daunting task, and there's a lot of thought that goes into how am I going to do this, and they need to identify partners, you know, that have done this before. And again, the pandemic was a terrific example of a bunch of people who you may have a famous, well-known investor. That doesn't mean you're going to know how to do this in 3 months or even 6 months. And also doing it, in a pre-recorded live stream where you put a band in a empty museum or an atrium. That doesn't. When we all go back into the room, you've got to contemplate seat kills and where the cameras are going to go, what the bandwidth is there, and how you're going to run cable. I think that would have been another big hurdle for any of those companies that survived to contemplate. So having said that, I think a lot of what we've talked about today, pre-planning, testing, understanding the angst, also the talent, whether that's a speaker, an influencer, or a music artist, they may change things on the fly, and you've got to be cognizant and aware of that. But also, where is this experience going to go? Most brands have 2 or 3 priority social media destinations. You look at a brand like Mercedes, they gravitate towards that mosaic offering of Instagram because it's so visual. Another brand might prioritize YouTube, and another might be big on Twitch. And you've got to align with that thinking and knowing you're probably going to take this broadcast to 2, maybe 3, or sometimes maybe more of those platforms. And you may also be on their influencer accounts as well. So how are you going to build a workflow to support that? But at the end of the day, eliminate any single point of failure and test, and the result is going to be that. The likelihood of a successful result is going to be that much more prominent.
Jay or Corey, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the big thing that we've been doing on a workflow standpoint, especially on the redundancy thing, is having that, to John's point, a lot of brands will turn on distribution last minute. And to his point about influencers, right? We had this happen. A lot of fashion houses do this now. A lot of times, this whole idea of collaboration with other brands is happening more and more. I mean, I remember doing a fashion house, and all of a sudden we had 5 TikToks for different influencers we had to go to. And so I think more and more we're finding that the best workflow tends to be a primary backup to the cloud. And then, having your distribution point out there for a couple reasons. One, you limit the bandwidth you have to use on site to get your feed out, which is good. In a lot of venues, you need to do that because they'll have limited, right? They might only have Verizon Business, and then you have a cellular backup. And to John's point, like if you got a lot of people there, cellular backups might not happen for you. And then by going to the cloud now, I can have my remote operators kind of go, okay, well, I've got redundancy not just in my cloud not in my cloud region, but I can go to other regions. So if that I have, a region go down, I'm still streaming to another one. So a lot of times we'll do a primary to, an AWS Oregon, and then a backup to AWS Ohio. And that gives us a lot of different kind of redundancy and the ability to be flexible, because a lot of clients, a lot of this stuff, even in large events, is happening last minute. I remember for New Year's Eve 2 years ago, we added 4 metaverses 2 days before the show, right? And it was like, we didn't do any metaverses last year, so that tells you what happened with that. But but the flexibility, your workflow, even in a large scale production, how you do things and how you build your stack is really important, because ultimately, if my client gets a sponsor, Planet Fitness or whatever sponsor that they have to have, that sponsor is going to have some other deliverables, and you got to be nimble and ready to go and ready to deliver those new distribution points.
And this may bleed to the next question, Jason, but that's I mean, Corey's exactly right. I mean, just as a quick example, we just did. But we did the red carpet premieres for Fast X and Oppenheimer, and we did over 150 million impressions to talk about the big numbers that it's a big number, and it's not the key value, 15 million plays, something like that. But we did 150 social accounts, we did 40 TikTok streams, we did 25 Instagrams, like 70 Facebook cross posts. And we managed not only, what's crazy is the technical side of that's not that bad. It's a lot of computers copying RTMPs and hitting stream and having the internet and the capacity to do it, but just the communications with clients to auth all those accounts to, that's universal. So that's every single regional universal account, Ireland, Spain, Brazil, like an unending list. And so that to what Corey said very much earlier, pre-prod, spending 2 weeks talking to every single region in different time zones, being like, we need your two-step code, we need this, and also having the relationship with those platforms. Like, I can directly go to people at Meta and be like, hey, I need you to whitelist these accounts. People at Twitter to help, or X, to help with whitelisting Media Studio and getting OBS live streaming enabled on TikTok. So like, being around and working with those brands so closely over time has like made that friction a little easier for clients who maybe don't have those direct connections. But yeah, it's a wild west when you start streaming to every regional brands, accounts, and their influencers, and across different platforms with different experiences.
No, and I think that's great. I think it does sort of flow right into the next question, and I'm gonna keep you answering this one first. But obviously, again, you guys are more than just technologists, right? And technology platforms. You are helping brands build these live streaming experiences with interactivity. You're making recommendations to them. You're showing them best practices. You're talking about their KPIs. And so what we just talked about a little bit was about physical distribution, right? Yes, we need to have redundancy in the cloud and regional, and we need to use multi-CDNs and all that, distribution you're telling them to do. But what about in terms of the distribution strategies more around some things we've touched on, like go talk to all your influencers in your industry, get them to amplify your message. So John talked a little bit about amplification. What are some of the recommendations you make? What are some of the strategies you talk about with your customers regarding how to distribute their live stream so that they maximize the number of views or engagements, or they can better hit the KPIs that they've said are important to them?
Sure, yeah. And I think, piggybacking on what I was just saying about that mass distribution, and I think we all know, is like, you want to stream to where the people are. So that's across all the social networks. We're streaming a lot to LinkedIn now, and every different demographic as an organic. People think that, or a lot of brands think that, if you keep it in one spot, that's the way to go. Like, if you spread it out too thin, you're gonna cannibalize your audience. But in reality, every platform is a different audience, and where you put dollars for their ad spends, that's a great recommendation. And based on what the content is, we see a lot of success with Twitter, a lot of success with Facebook. It really depends on what your ad spend's like and what your main KPIs are. But really distributing it everywhere. And also, we touched a little bit about like custom experience outside of social. So we've been building our platform for the last 10-ish years, mainly focused around high-end fashion and distributing a really custom tailored approach. So, based on what country you load the experience in, you're going to see tailored language on graphics, tailored language on sometimes the video content. Like, we stream a lot for fashion, for Dior, for Balenciaga, for these big brands, to APAC, to China. And for China specifically, everything goes through a sensor. So they're seeing a distinct video feed than everyone else. We have partnerships with Alibaba to like accelerate our traffic into mainland China spots. We work a lot with the APAC brands to, get them very specific Japanese title cards, like post graphics, pop-ups, like all these type of tailored experiences to reach those markets. Really help them drive, making their experiences more tailored and, allowing those viewers to feel more taken care of, essentially.
And Corey, what are your thoughts on that? I know you mentioned one thing sort of a little earlier about the Sports Illustrated, and we found that it was, the traffic was better if you put it on the homepage and not 4 pages down. What kind of things are you talking to your customers about that they should do with regards to, better distribution strategies?
A couple things. One, tailored experience. If you're gonna go, I try to tell brands, yes, you want to go everywhere, but you need to make sure that you're paying attention to your audience on the everywheres you're going to. So many brands will spray and then they don't pay attention to people that have, we'll be monitoring end to end, but are we really answering people on these other platforms? The second thing I want to bring up is translation and accessibility. I think that, that is a huge, a lot of brands kind of dismiss it for cost reasons in a lot of ways, but I think less and less so. So, for instance, we just helped produce the Anime Awards from Japan. Very, very high-end event, very popular event, pretty much in Japanese with English. And what we did is we basically set up a cloud distribution system and had added 7 translations. So we added translation to all of the streams, and we saved them a couple $100,000 based on what they did the year before, because it was mostly done in the cloud by operators. But the more important thing here is, you see like people like Mr. Beast doing this, right? Where it's like you have to tailor your content to your audience globally, right? It's not enough to just do something in English. It's not enough to, do something and not have really good captioning and, ASL, right? And all of the different accessibility. I mean, for DNC 2020, we had, for every main stream, we had about 15 different takes on the actual stream, meaning like 3 ASL versions, audio description version. And so these are some of the things that I think over time you're going to see more and more of, not just in politics and in government, but tailoring your stream, right? It really does matter. And I think that we think about events at scale for everyone, right? We think about these big tentpole events for everyone, but more and more the bigger tentpole events, and you see this with the NFL, right? With Amazon on Thursdays, where it's not about Al Michaels broadcast only. There's other versions of the broadcast that people can see and that they can experience. And I think you're going to see that more and more and more and more. And, especially as we get to AI, where you're going to tailor, it's fascinating, right? Because if you own the player, right, which in all, we don't always own the player in all cases. If you're BeLive, you do own the player. You know so much about your end user that you have this opportunity to deliver to the end user in a way that can be very, very specific. And we really haven't even touched the third rail of that whole idea.
And John, what about your thoughts, John? What kind of advice, again, or recommendations do you have, and the conversations you have with your clients about distribution strategies?
I'm a big believer in the wider, the better, particularly with the social platforms. But I think you got to have a reality check. Live video is not the first thing, with the exception of Twitch, that these companies think of when they wake up in the morning. It's important to them for sure, but Instagram, Twitter, YouTube have other things that they do that are significant priorities. So I think Jay made a terrific point, having or knowing the live ops teams at some of these companies, having a relationship with them, knowing the strengths and some of the challenges that they present, knowing that you might be on the brand's official account, but you also might be on the talent or the influencer or the brand ambassador. But having that strategy and going wider is going to yield, I think, a far more significant amount of viewership and success. And you're going to engage, I think, to Corey's point too, the audiences are also different on each of those platforms, and they're going to be different on each of those accounts. But you've sunk the cost into the experience. Why not add some encoding paths and go to that bigger and that broader audience, especially if you're going to be doing this with the idea of programming in mind. But I think you got to take a wider footprint is always going to yield better results.
No, I think that's great, and it's there's definitely a theme here. Throughout all of these questions is really about again, planning, asking the questions, making sure it's the proverbial dotting your I's and crossing your T's. It seems like a lot of this advice to brands is about making sure that you understand where you're delivering, who those audiences are on those platforms, and how do you make sure you keep track of their experience. In the streaming world, we always talk about QoE, right? The quality of experience, keeping track of that on those platforms so that you don't have bad experiences, which then tarnish your brand. Like you talked about, people talked about this sort of remembering these events that failed, the Oscars, and people don't forget, and that hurts brands. So it's really interesting theme to sort of hear that spread out across all of these questions. All right, so let's actually turn to audience questions for a little bit. We've got a few here, and I want to make sure we get to some of these. So the first one, and let's see. Let's point this first at Jay, and then Corey and John jump in if you want. But Jay, so the question is this person said they're always interested in hearing a description of what the typical customer is like in terms of needs and technical familiarity. So I'm sure there's going to be a very interesting answer to this question. But what's your thoughts on that? What does a typical customer look like?
Yeah, so a lot of times it's someone in the marketing department of brand or someone just, cold calling because they have an event. But a lot of times it's a lot of hand holding and it's a lot of explaining the process, showing them what the end result's going to be. And, we do this so much collectively that we are like, when I'm on initial phone calls with people, I ask them their goals and I get a little bit of the event and I just start brainstorming with them ideas because we know what will work and just letting them come up creatively with things that they may think is not possible and helping them meet in the middle to what, we know we can achieve, given a budget and things like that. That always where the rubber meets the road there. But, and to the question of like what the normal person is like, we have pretty like detailed write-ups of like, here's what you get on Facebook. It starts with a graphic and then we go live and then there's a replay and then we clip it. And then and then the VOD experience on every platform and really lay it out per platform, per experience, what the end user is going to get and what your options are to updating your content per platform, trimming, replacing, all those types of things, just so they're not surprised at the end. They're like, with some expectation that was unrealistic.
Absolutely. John or Corey, what are your thoughts?
I think a brand wants seamless, flawless execution, but they do not want to know how the sausage is made, right? They want and that's kind of the reality, especially if you're dealing with, a senior marketing team and their digital and their social teams. They're picking up a little bit more of as video and live video is becoming more prevalent, more popular. They're picking up some of the key items and the key terms. Also, especially if they've had a failure in the past, then they're going to be a little bit more sensitive and more leaned in. But for the most part, they've gone and put together an event and they've got the talent and they're launching a product. They're focused on that. This is a critical part of their business, but no one's ever said to me, what type of, what are the settings on your encoder? That hasn't come up. They just want this thing to work flawlessly. And they put a lot of trust in us and people in this industry. And also, if you have to bring in, third-party enhancement solutions, they expect that. Like, go do that, take care of it. We're going to hold you to the same. We're going to hold them to the same standard in our agreement that we're going to hold you to, and you're responsible for that. But at the end of the day, they don't want to get too technical, but they just want the comfort of knowing you're going to do this the right way.
That makes sense. Corey, I'm going to actually point another question at you to start us off here, and that is, I think this is a question that will open up a can of worms, but what challenges do you face when delivering on the public internet versus an enterprise environment?
Oh dear. I mean, pretty much we're always delivering on public internet. If we do enterprise, it's some kind of ECDN situation where you have a large corporation and their problem is actually viewers inside of their corporate network being able to view based on their bandwidth. And so, when I was at Livestream has had an ECDN solution. We have this sometimes. The challenges are real. I think that from the distribution and transmission side, technologies like SRT have really allowed us to, it's really helped us. I mean, since we've been using it since 2017, 18. And trying not to use RTM, trying to get away from RTMP and trying to get away from some of the older technologies. Really understanding your workflow and increasing your latency, not being afraid of latency, understanding what latency bubbles are, right? The pandemic really in my opinion, the pandemic set streaming back a lot of ways. And we're just kind of like pulling ourselves back out of that to be as good as we were in 18 and 19. The public internet is real. You've got to understand your how far you are away from the place you want to be, right? When I was in Milwaukee for DNC, we were on a dedicated line, but we still were 12 hops away from AWS Ohio, right? And so you got to understand those things and you got to try to deal with them and try to use technologies that are going to help you do workarounds around them. I mean, most viewer experiences that are bad tend to be on the last mile for the viewer, which you're the most not in control of, which is really sad. So you've got to make sure if you've got, if you're using your own player and you're using your own systems, adaptive bitrate is your friend, right? And you got to just remember, hey, I know that 120 kilobit or 256 kilobit cell phone garbage stream is not, you're not thinking about it, but you got to make sure your ABR stack is real, and you got to make sure it's there for you, because those are the things that really can screw you on the back end, and those are the people that are going to complain the most about something happening to your stream.
Yeah, Jay, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a bunch of things. So just real quick, Corey touched on like delivering inside of enterprise network. We've implemented P2P on our live streaming. So when you're in a closed corporate environment, we actually can handle that pretty well by doing essentially, peer-to-peer sharing of those segments on your adaptive bitrate layer. And that's been really successful, both as a cost saving measure, but also as a delivery measure to successfully navigate those types of situations. But on the delivering from an event that's, somewhere in the world back to your NOC or back to the cloud, what we typically do, our primary ends up still being, satellite essentially, so that we are in a closed loop and we can control as much as we can uplink and downlink. And we have, fiber connectivities on, like Tata and Encompass and the switch and all those types of setups. And secondarily, we usually will we will use globally when we're in like Paris for Fashion Week and things like that, we'll use like Tata to their closest POP and then go close network back to us in New York, so that we can, as much as we can, avoid problems of scaling the globe on the public internet. And at those large scale productions, when they've spent $2 million for a 15-minute fashion show, like it needs to work in that 15 minutes really well. Yeah, that's a little bit of how we navigate the production side, at least, and the transmission side of the public internet.
Yeah, no, it's very different approaches. And John, I'm gonna point this last question to you before we wrap this up. And the question is actually an interesting one: is do you think multi-camera streamings, possibly where users can choose it, are going to be common in the short term, or are they going to be like maybe years from now? What does that look like as a sort of method of engagement?
We actively do this for AT&T. We help them kind of tell this 5G concert lens experience where the audience, AT&T is executing at the Final Four, the college football playoffs, and the NBA pregame All-Star concert. And these are pretty compelling, pretty stunning experiences. And I found that if you give the viewer the ability to curate their viewing experience, they're that much more interested in the overall engagement. And again, they're going to come back and they're going to bring their friends, and you're going to see the watch time explode. I've been involved in things in the past, like the Oscars, where it was like 6 or 8 camera feeds, and frankly, that's just viewer fatigue, and some of those cameras weren't even being watched. And when the Oscars did dial it down, I think to 4, I think they won a technical Emmy. I think gives you, in this day and age where people are surrounding the stage with their camera phones and they're broadcasting, I think Taylor Swift's tour has been live streamed on TikTok ad nauseum. I think it becomes an interesting perspective for the audience, and so I think we'll certainly see more of that. I think the content experience has to lend itself to that type of a look, but certainly why not? The more innovation that you can offer, the better. And I think as also the companion audio stream, if that's done properly, because the talent cares more about audio than they do video, and sometimes that also impacts the happiness of the audience. But certainly, I think there'll be a lot more of that.
Very cool. Okay, so we've got a minute left. I'm gonna do a little around the horn question. We'll start with Corey, then John, then Jay. You got about 15 seconds to answer this question. Kind of think I know what the answer of most of you guys are gonna be here, but what one piece of advice would you give to others who are aiming to deliver flawless live streaming experiences for massive audiences? Corey, go.
Rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. Never not rehearse. Anytime I've ever failed, it's because we didn't rehearse.
Oh, I love that. John.
I think the industry is an interesting place, and that's really the answer. And if you look at what happened in April, Coachella live broadcast from every single stage, all 6 of them for the first time ever. And I've done a couple Coachellas where you had to time shift and only do it from a handful of stages. Big, beautiful AR and drone coverage. And ironically, that Sunday night, Netflix's Love is Blind had a complete failure. So result is the industry is I feel like we've been doing this, all of us, for a long time. but it's still in its infancy. And how you get to success really is test and rehearse and plan.
Test, rehearse, and plan. Jay?
To not repeat the obvious correct answers they just gave, I guess one other thing it would be to just really understand your client's goals and try to meet them and exceed them, because that's the only way they're going to keep coming back for more work.
I love it. All right, gentlemen, that was a fantastic panel. Really appreciate your participation, and thanks for joining this conversation. And I'm going to hand it back over to Evan.
Thank you, JT. You did a great job moderating yet again. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for everybody for sticking around, but congratulations most of all to Svetlana Myalik, who won our song naming contest with the answer, "Your Love Is Just Too Much" by Gene Harris and Three Sounds. I feel like Wolfman Jack, which is a reference many won't get. Thanks for sticking around for this entire panel. It was yet again great. Streaming Media will reach out to you, Svetlana, about the winning card. Once again, thanks to BeLive for sponsoring this panel, and stick around or come back at 11:30 for our next great panel, the best of both worlds, making hybrid events work for all viewers. It'll be a great panel, and we'll give away yet another gift card. I'll see you in a half an hour.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.